Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to CIBC Presents Entrepreneurship 101. And I would remind you about this evening's, one of our special sponsors, the J.P. Bickle Foundation, which actively supports educational programs such as these. Not that there's many like this out there, as I am discovering. Couple of points. I think last week I simply said the 29th regarding the Upstart. I, of course, meant April 29th. You've already figured that out since it's now April 1st. It will be upstairs, CR2, where we've had lectures, a couple of lectures this year. It will start at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It will run, the presentations will run until about 5. The judges will retire, make their decision, and then there's a party up in the cafe area up there. Everybody is welcome to come to take in the presentations. Again, I will remind you, everybody who attends will be required to sign a non-disclosure agreement. It's a blanket one you sign as you go in order to protect any material that the presenters are putting forward. So you can come to that. You can also just come to the party. The reception at the end is intended to be a bit of a year-end party. We're going to try and rope in as many of the speakers to attend that. We'll have the awarding of the giant fake check for the winners of the competition. Wine, cheese, and a good time will hopefully be had by all. So even if you can't take the whole afternoon, then come at the regular 5:30 time, and we'll have a bit of a wrap-up party. And we're trying to get some bigwig mucky-muck politicians to come for a photo op on the award that we're making. You never know if that's ever going to succeed or not. So, tonight's speaker, we're delighted to welcome back Lance Laking, who is another true friend of Mars. Lance has a background, he has an accountancy economics degree from Waterloo, and has done the executive development program at Queen's. What he brings to us here is over 15 years of experience in building and managing high-growth companies. And I got to know Lance in the context of one particular company, BTI Photonics, which he took from a pretty small startup, struggling at the time, that our fund had put some money into, and he turned it into a very successful, growing company, delivering photonic systems into the telecom industry. And that's not an easy industry to get product into. So Lance is now working more closely with Mars. He's an entrepreneur in residence. And he's actually now providing business advice, board services with small startup companies through his own business, as well as working with us here at Mars. So Lance in the past has focused very much on kind of sales and tech. How do you get those two teams to talk to one another? And I always remember he said, and I'm not stealing your thunder, that the techies are peer motivated and the sales guys are coin operated. And so this year, he's actually broadening that a little bit. It's human capital, the importance of high-performance teams to a startup success, and you guys have seen the blurb. So I see this as a little bit of a hybrid of sort of the content lectures with a little bit of a lived-it flavor as to what it's like to actually manage these disparate teams and make a company successful. So, Lance, over to you.
Thanks very much, Tony. It's great. And to the subject tonight about teams and the power of teams and collaboration and so forth, I certainly can't take the credit for BTI and BTI Photonic Systems going from 0 to 40 million without a team, that's for sure. So I was I was part of that ride, and I had fun along the way, and I hope I helped with some of the leadership parts of it, but it was all team for sure. So I'm pleased to be here today and happy as a returning speaker to share some stories, and perhaps you can take away 1 or 3 gems to apply to your endeavors. And I was asking Tony just before we got going tonight, kind of the cross-section of the audience, and understand, you know, the cast of characters that's here in the room, and how maybe I can help fine-tune it. So I'll keep that in with a lens of cross-section of students, primarily, I guess, in later parts of their academic endeavor, and a handful of outside entrepreneurs or entrepreneur wannabes, and probably a few accomplished business people amongst the crowd in itself as well. So welcome, everybody. Again, as we mentioned, in terms of subject matter, I'll put it into a little bit of context. First of all, talk about how my experience has related to teams and building teams and being successful along that side. And then I'll talk again to the concept of a technical component and call it a sales and marketing, or a market-facing component of teams in an organization, and how do you get those two pieces to work together and synchronize and take a technical or an invention type endeavor out to a marketplace and be commercially successful. So that's diversity and the dynamics associated there. A few comments around hiring, which is always a challenge, and you know, hiring slow and firing fast is often said, and I believe in that premise. But the hiring process you can't spend enough time making the right calls at the hiring stage, and then culture from the perspective of leadership trying to influence and guide culture in an organization, and talk a bit around that front. My communication style and what has worked for me, and everyone has their own communication style, and so this is just one example that you might be able to pull the odd thing from. I can talk a little bit, or I can talk a lot about compensation and incentive plans, and so if there is sort of a shooting lane that is of interest, just throw something up at me and we can get in a little bit more detail there. I can talk about some concepts around the extended team, which can include, for example, an advisory board of a young organization. And so if you envision setting up a company and would like to sort of punch above your weight without having a heavy salary load, and want to pull in, say, advisory type capacity to your organization, I can talk to a little bit of experience there, and then we'll wrap up. So I'm driving for about, 30 or 40 minutes, and we'll be done around 6:30. So without further ado, just around human capital, I mean, those famous Dr. Adams principles of economics on the elements of production and so on. Human capital can't be underestimated. No matter how strong you think your invention or product or technology or idea is, it will not go anywhere without a strong human capital element to turn the organization into market success. And then on the high performance team point of view, really I look at that as strictly putting together people that in unison are really focused on the goals, and obviously the measurement there is the achievement of those goals. So again, my context, I'm not a U of T guy. I grew up in Western Canada, but I finished high school in the city of Ottawa. I live in Ottawa, went to school in Waterloo, went down a finance path, and so I have a chartered accountancy designation, and I've done a couple of different stints in executive development. But a lot of my learnings has been inside organizations. I've built up my own company, which I took half of it public on the Toronto Stock Exchange through a reverse takeover. I sold half of that company to a large Swiss multinational company, and I ended up working for that Swiss company, so I got some great international experience, both in Switzerland and in other countries. And then my association with Tony was created through my position at BTI Photonics, which I just left there midway through last year as CEO of that company. So I've raised some venture capital, and I've had a cross-section of different stakeholders inside companies, both bootstrap finance companies on my own side, to a multinational company that is blue-blooded with big Swiss bank accounts that finances its growth through its own endeavor, and then both U.S. and Canadian venture capital in all within a technology environment. So most of my comments are related to tech companies, and most of them are product related as opposed to software related companies. My sweet spot, I would say, is anywhere from sort of $1 million in revenue to $50 million in revenue. So I don't have a lot of experience in big companies where I'm intimately involved, but I can really zone in on the sort of, I'll say, $10 to $50 million as the stage of company where most of my experience lies. The second part of the context, again, is my experience base is mostly around technical products. So you can imagine when I landed at BTI Photonics Systems, it was a funny place for me, being more tuned to sales operations and business operations. And I land inside this company where there were about 26 employees, and 18 of the 26 employees were PhDs in optical physics, wearing white lab coats in a clean room. And so that was pretty crazy, because the first experience I had with team there and what have we got here and how are we going to build a business was sitting around with 18 of 26 PhDs in optical physics talking to me about their project. And I was thinking, oh man, here we are inside a company that we're just, had 12 or 15 million dollars of venture capital dumped into it, and it was, let's build a market and build a global company, and these guys are all talking about their projects. And so that was part of this genesis of this lecture, talking about on one hand, the element of invention and technical team with the mandate to commercialize, and how do we take all this intellectual property to the market. Most of my experience has been inside very long and technical sales processes. So whether that's selling into a communication carrier environment that has long qualification, long test, or deep relationship, or big business-to-business type selling environments. And most of my experience has been in high-growth environments. So whether that's through the sort of tech wave up to the boom-bust cycle of 2000, or the broadband and bandwidth growth wave of the mid-2000s up to present, it's all been in and around high-growth scenarios. And then the other aspect of context and lens is that I'm very familiar with the David and Goliath syndrome. So where that is a small organization that doesn't have full team, that doesn't have brand, that doesn't have market presence associated with brand, that has very little in the way of revenue, that has to go up against maybe some entrenched and large Goliaths in the space. How do you carve out a niche? How do you find that shooting lane? How do you build a business? And that kind of thing. So my comments about team and about building effective aspects of that are all within that lens. So then, building on that sort of multi-functioning teams, as organized organizations grow. I mean, when you're first starting, your marketing guy is your biz dev guy, is your salesperson, and you have, and that's one person, and then your, I would be doing everything from contracts to hiring to, helping set up new furniture, so it doesn't matter. So team is really concentrated, and the beauty of these young organizations is you're just involved in all aspects of everything. But as the company grows, you have distinct groups of different disciplined engineering personas. You have a strong product management persona. You have quality teams. You have your distinct marketing team and sales force, and you eventually have a dedicated customer service team, and then you have the related sort of stakeholders in the organization around directors and any of the sort of employee relation groups and that kind of thing, HR and obviously finance. And so suddenly, as things start to grow up, you have a concept of team, but everyone has such a different function and experience base and contribution to the organization. And that's a big challenge as the management team and leadership inside that is how do I understand each of those sort of functional areas and what makes them tick, and how you can leverage sort of their areas of interest to make a cohesive unit that's driving for these overarching goals that you set. And that's, again, building on what I spoke a little bit in more detail about last year, was this sort of Venus and Mars aspect of the deep lab coat PhD type persona in the lab doing the research element, and then you have the classical persona of a software engineer that's happy crunching code and eating cheesies, and then you have the port and polished Hugo Boss suit sales and marketing guys out there that are trying to push product out into the marketplace. And how do you have these very disparate type groups within your organization gelling together and rowing in the same direction, and the communication in between all three, and incentives and compensation linkages and all that sort of thing. And so that's not an easy thing to put together. And to that, as we talked about the motivation and drive side of things, I would see maybe more so on the engineering side, and certainly on the deep science of the research element of what you're after, a lot of peer recognition, a lot of accolade around, for example, assignment to a patent and participation in various groups, both in the organization and within the sort of expertise affiliations of universities and academia and so on, around published papers and being able to speak at a trade show and all that kind of thing. Those are all motivating factors that I would really try and encourage within the organization for that technical side. And then the sales guys, pretty simple, or sales people, I should say, and that is really strictly and almost totally coin operated. And it's not to say that there are some other factors, but I believe that the best salespeople should be coin operated, and I like it when they're coin operated, because that way it's very clear in terms of setting their motivation, and very clear on what we need to accomplish together through the straightforward rewards of a salesperson. So you have that, but then you step back from it and you think, well, it's not necessarily all different, because there is always that commonality of recognition. And so it's that pat on the back for a job well done. It's the overarching communique that there was a contribution to moving the yardsticks on the business towards a stated goal or the success of the business. And there's all the common elements that are within an organization for measurement around achieving the budget, around winning a new customer, around a recognition within, say, a market journal that has branding recognition for a young company or something along those lines, are all common right through the organization, no matter if you're working on the photonic research side or you're trying to bring in this quarter's purchase order. And so it comes down to a point where the technical team wants to work on a successful product. I don't know many engineers that like to design products that never go anywhere. So success in the product is a common element. And obviously, salespeople always want to sell the newest and latest and greatest and most advanced product. And the common thread between those is customers and markets. And so I really have seen a lot of advantage to always threading customer experience into the communique, and try to challenge the technical team to, well, what customer would use this and why, and try to take a technical team out into the marketplace in some ways, and always to test their technical thesis to what the sales guys who are always saying, well, if we had this in our product, I could sell it. Well, if I had this in the product, I could sell it. And so it's trying to marry those two elements of sell what we have, and on the technical side, understand what the customer needs. And that's the common thread. And to that, one of my takeaway recommendations was the concept of product management, product marketing, and really strong early days product management in an organization, because they are that weaving thread between the technical team and the sales and marketing team. And that effective product management skill set can't be underestimated, in my opinion, for effectiveness within a young organization. So to the subject matter of trying to really generate this effective teaming and communique, I can't stress enough the importance of bringing back customer feedback to the engineering teams that are starved for information on, does this work? Did they like this GUI? Does the software work as intuitively as we think it does? What's the feedback on how the cabling works on this product versus that product, or anything in terms of customer feedback? The engineering teams are always starved for that. And so always try to have a debrief on a successful sales call that brings back some of those nuggets around product. Second to that, and my note there about pushing decisions to where the expertise resides, I'm a big believer of that in terms of an effective team structure. I would never try to trump a decision in a domain area that I have very little or no experience in. And so if it's a call on a new market launch of a product, on how we should do it and what it should look like and all that sort of thing, you push that to the product marketing teams that have that domain expertise. And I'm not the guy who's going to say, no, we've got to run this with a 2 gig processor instead of a 1 gig processor, whatever. This is a technical decision. So always pushing that decision process down to where the strongest expertise reside makes for faster decisions, less churn, more engaged teams that don't feel that they're being dissed or not being respected for their contributions, and that's always proved out well. And again, I'm repeating myself in terms of that common linkage between the development team and the sales team. It's product management, and several examples of companies that I've been involved with or I've seen have been tremendously successful because of very early days product management. I think if I was building a company from ground zero and there's that technology or intellectual property piece right there, I think maybe my very first hire would be product management in front of, you know, a finance guy, in front of a sales and a business development person, because that product management person really builds the set of tools that are required for a marketing person to go out in and test it. So that's a real good thing to back pocket. I always had fun with the ability to pull people from outside of their area of functionality and put them into a new experience set. So we would frequently use our very technical design people to go to a trade show, for example, and work the booth. And that doesn't mean that you have, you know, a guy trying to sell that is normally, you know, crunching C++ code or something, but at least that person has the opportunity to see a whole nother aspect of the business. And so it's oftentimes well received by customers as well when a very technical expert is brought into a discussion and can add that extra bit of value. And then at the same time, the sales and marketing teams that might downplay the complexity or the importance of, or the challenge around designing product, you just park those guys in the lab for a day and have them do final test or have them do final assembly on a product, and it's tremendously valuable for their learning and for their appreciation of some of the other aspects of the organization. So it's that cross-functionality or job-sharing type experience has really worked well to foster the teamwork element. Now, a couple of comments around, I'll focus on management teams as opposed to any team, because as an organization grows to be 10 or 15 or 30 or 100 people, at that critical mass, you do have, you know, 2 or 4 or 7 people that are your core management team members. And it starts obviously with the hiring aspect and the domain expertise and the functional requirements that you need, but the people side of those teams, what kind of persona you want and what kind of environment and culture you want there is one where I really believe in hiring outside of your sort of persona. So if I'm a conservative guy that might love to play hockey and snowboard and be very conservative on financial decisions, then hire, you know, an esoteric, wacky marketing person that you know, plays the banjo. You know, getting all these different experience sets, bringing them into a team environment is so powerful, rather than, you know, the IBM model of white shirt, blue suit, and you know, this is our persona. Perhaps the most important thing around, you know, aptitude versus attitude and attitude versus academic and experience set and training and education and all that, I believe, is adversity quotient. And adversity quotient is when those curveballs get thrown at you, and when you thought this was going to happen and doesn't happen, and when the market falls out and you were counting on the market not to fall out, and so on and so forth. That is the type of adversity that will inevitably be thrown at young companies and any companies. Look at our friends at Chrysler talking to Fiat these days. So it's all around dealing with that adversity. And it's actually a measured component that the adversity quotient is a test that you can take and you can actually have it as part of your hiring process, where you can get a gauge on a person's adversity quotient. It's something similar to the Briggs personality profile type testing. But this adversity quotient is a great measure of how someone's going to react under stress and duress, and their resiliency factor to be able to get creative and come up with decisions. So great teams have high AQ measurements. Knowing each member in the team and knowing that, oh yeah, really, really strong at creative idea generation, but terrible on tactical block and tackle execution. And so the SWOT analysis on each team and knowing who you can go to get one aspect done or one project done, and understanding each person's SWOT analysis so that as you're making these hard decisions, it's very contributory rather than exclusive. And then I think the final point around strong teams is always, 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 always having a plan B or having a plan C. And that should be something that's ready to be implemented, always executing on plan A, but for sure having that plan B. And if you have 5 or 4 or 6 of those elements within your structure of a management team, it doesn't matter if your competitor is Intel or your competitor is got the market share that you strive for. You can absolutely lock in and be successful with this kind of thing happening. On hiring, a lot of times you may think that you, as a startup company, you're compromised and you won't be able to attract top talent because you can't pay them the top dollar, and you're going to have to make pretty significant compromises. I don't believe that is the case. I believe that there's a really strong cross-section of individuals that love the startup environment and love to get into organizations when they're small and when responsibility and challenge is wide, and when the sky is the limit in terms of where things can go. So attracting top talent and not compromising to that hiring mandate is really important. And I've found that recently it doesn't have to be through the expensive recruiting sourcing, when the power of the social networking tools that are out there, and especially LinkedIn now, I find is tremendously valuable in identifying candidates and building teams. Just was involved with a company that required a strong business development person, and a small company based here in Ontario, and ended up through LinkedIn, through a third-tier connection on LinkedIn, hiring a very strong business development person in Dallas. And that simply would not have been possible without that tool, and it would have been a 30% of base salary if that person could have been found through a recruiter. And interestingly enough, talking to a number of recruiters, they have even said, talking to the candidates from these recruiters that have come forward, and said, well, how did you hear about our company, Lixar, for example? And they say, well, the recruiter didn't know me. The recruiter found me on LinkedIn and told me about this opportunity. And so after that message came to me once or 3 times, I realized that, holy smokes, these recruiters are pulling 30% of the salary fee, and their database isn't necessarily as strong as they purport it to be. They're just using standard LinkedIn tools like I could use. So here we go. So that's sort of a fresh little learning that I've had on the hiring front. A lesson that on the negative side, perhaps, on the hiring front, was one where you will get a case where some of your maybe friends and family, or maybe first investors, or maybe directors or advisors inside your company are strongly suggesting that, oh, this guy's great, or oh, you should talk to her, she's fantastic, and you got to hire this person. And that's fantastic, and it oftentimes is the case. but it can also be a real problem area. And if that potential candidate doesn't fit into the culture or the persona that you're trying to set in an organization, or if your gut just doesn't quite feel right about this person in terms of being able to, engage and fit into the style that you have inside the organization, then cut it off and don't make that hire, and defend your gut, even if the influencing party is suggesting otherwise. I brought in a very accomplished chief operating officer into my most recent company, and a fantastic resume of accomplishment inside a very large organization. And my one overhanging feeling was, can this person morph from a 2,000 or 3,000 employee organization and work inside a 100-person company? And I took a flyer on it because of this high recommendation, and even though my gut was saying, I think he's a big person company, and it turns out a year later, my feeling was confirmed, and the end result is a year stall and big salary and severance and so on and so forth. So again, it comes back to that sort of gut reaction before you make the final call. I've repeated myself on the product management side, and I won't do it again. Recently here at Mars, there was the OCEDA-sponsored and SDTC-sponsored Ontario Clean Tech report that was presented and highlighted right here on this stage. And one of the fantastic findings or summary takeaways was around that element of the switching weighting of function inside the organization, and how early an organization should start to beef up sales and marketing. And so on the X and Y axis here, you have sort of the percentage of functional area inside a company, and so the dark green is the R&D percentage inside a company. So when it's the life cycle of that company very young, it has a very heavy R&D component to it, and virtually none or very small sales and marketing component. And as an organization matures to a point where product is coming out of lab and approaching early alpha and beta, and let's go and test it in the market and so on, obviously a sales, marketing, and biz dev component starts to evolve. And so that weighting of research and development shrinks down, and that commercial element of sales and marketing starts to grow up. And the findings from this OCEDA report, when you map a revenue curve onto this life cycle, is that there's a distinct inflection point when revenue starts to kick onto that hockey stick. It really is matched with a very pronounced investment in sales and marketing. And so the takeaway there was, are we investing early enough in our sales and marketing assets or human capital inside an organization? And I think it's a real, fantastic observation that let's test this. Let's bring in a heavier weight of sales and marketing earlier, maybe before the product is quite ready, and before we who cares if it's still got some duct tape on it and that sort of thing. Let's get that investment earlier, and maybe we can move that revenue curve in by 6 months or a year or 18 months or whatnot. So that was a very key finding, and the good thing about that, and I think venture capitalists have recognized this for some time, that they are always looking at a strong technology play and emphasizing a sales and marketing component. But I think a good thing here is that the government funding that is available now is now recognizing and supporting investments in biz dev and sales and marketing. And so that will help, so that, say for example, the National Research Council IRAP grants aren't just focused on the development team salaries in a grant, and they're also applying some monies to having a biz dev and a marketing person to help take those new ideas out into the market for testing. That report, by the way, is available. Might even be available through Mars, the Mars website, or certainly available if you just Google OCEDA and call it the Clean Tech Growth Report. And there's a number of very interesting findings in there, but that was the one gem that really resonated with me. On the culture side, don't ever think that a company, well, we don't really have a culture here, or our culture is this, and then when you're having beers with the team or something on a Friday afternoon, and somebody politely tells you, you know what, this is this undertone, or there's always the perceived versus the real culture of an organization. Well, the perceived culture is the real culture in an organization, and as a leader of both either a team or the organization itself, recognize that perception and deal with it or work with it, and don't be so naive to think that, no, this is our culture. It's not that. The culture that is perceived in the organization is absolutely that. And you can sometimes garner your culture also through some things like customer surveys, or talking to some of your very favorite customers directly, or things like that. And it's not only from within the organization. It's really interesting to see how customers and suppliers perceive you and your culture. Certainly, a company is a much different beast when you're going after that first sale, or that first $20,000 PO, or that first $1 million in revenue barrier, versus the 5 and the 10 and the $25 million barrier. And as organizations grow up, it comes a point where you can rally in around the lunchroom and have a quick all-hands company meeting. That just goes away when you're 40 and 50 people and you have field sales offices or an external development team in Belfast or wherever. And so that culture really changes through the life cycle of an organization, and it's quite a challenge to be able to try and keep the strong parts of your culture through a high growth type period. The beautiful thing about Canada is you've got this unbelievable power of multiculturalism, and especially if you're going into global markets, it's wonderful that you can have that Spanish software engineer that can also help with customer service when something's wrong, because, oh man, we've got a customer in Madrid and they just need some help here. And so it's wonderful that you can build organizations and teams and leverage that multiculturalism, especially from the outbound market-facing side. And it helps with channel partner and customer engagements where you can break down some barriers, and just on all kinds of fronts. It also helps, I guess, on the Friday potluck lunches or something like that. My style as a leader, and I believe in being quite candid, and that candor should really translate into integrity. And so you don't candy coat, and you don't color dress this, and you don't suppress the bad stuff and that sort of thing. That culture of candor, once everyone is in that type of frame of mind, can really be part of your competitive advantage, and I believe in that. No matter how small the wins are in the early days, you should have a big old Swiss cowbell or something in your lunchroom that you're banging and celebrating those wins. And you should talk about setbacks or the things that didn't go your way, and you should also reward people for making some mistakes on a flight plan that was very calculated and thought would be successful, because the last thing you want to do is try and disincentivize people for getting creative and trying new things. So of course that doesn't mean that doing the same stupid thing over and over again is maybe that definition of insanity, so we won't want to go there. So, but rewarding mistakes without doing them 42 times in a row is key to a strong culture, I believe. My communication style, again, comes back to the not your typical tech CEO, where I don't have an engineering background and I didn't come to the party with a deep domain experience on the technical side, and instead brought an operational and sales and finance side to the game. Open, honest, straightforward, just clear, common sense stuff. It's just, it seems foolish that you wouldn't do anything but that. It's surprising to know how much oh, I don't want to tell anybody about that. But in small organizations, everybody knows about the good, the bad, and the ugly. So just be open and straightforward about it. When something is going off the rails and you need to have a tough conversation, I believe in having that tough conversation sooner rather than later. And even though as hard as that is, it's usually the right thing to do. And what I mean by stopping management happy talk, it's kind of like the classic moose on the table type environment when you're discussing problems and trying to make decisions. If you're all drinking the Kool-Aid, you're really putting yourself into a dangerous position in terms of not being aware of competitive threats or reality bites and that sort of thing. So it isn't a case where you are all in la-la land. And so I really believe in the challenge, and not necessarily the challenging authority. I mean challenging reason and challenging all the variables of a decision. It's again common sense that you work on the problem and not on the people. I mean, there's obviously professional development and people development side of things, but it's the problem that you focus on. And I just I cringe when you hear about those sort of autocratic, you dumbass type environments that just doesn't work in any company, but especially in a small company. Always I've taken great value out of the number of three, and 3 big objectives, 3 corporate objectives to a plan, and then each functional area having 3 goals in support of that, and repeating those 3 and driving for those 3, and it's just, again, you can remember it, and it breaks it down into simple terms, and it's that repetition of what our big picture goals are has always worked well for me. And suddenly on December the 31st, when only 12 months ago you think, oh man, those goals we set up seemed like audacious and hairy and crazy, but it's amazing how much you can move the yardsticks in the space of a year. It's April the 1st today, and the clock was turned into 2009 just 3 months ago, and where the hell did the first quarter go? So, it's really, really great that you repeat these goals and keep testing and measuring back against that, and that's just part of the overarching communication style that I've worked with. In terms of staffing and updates and communicate to people, it's again complementing boring impersonal email with real personal, informal type communique. On occasion, when organizations grow up, it's good to have the formal type environments and being very specific and sharing results. I've always shared financial results with all employees, right down to bottom line profitability. So not just sales and what our cost structure is, but right down to bottom line profitability, because most startup companies have some semblance of incentive plans that are tied to either profit sharing or employee stock option plans. And so that is all driven by enterprise value, which is driven by profit creation. And so I really believe in the formal side of communicate to include full financial disclosure. Of course, you got to have fun along the way, and every company, again, builds their own idea of fun. So a couple of slides on compensation. funniest things that I ever was associated with was software engineers specifically, which I still can't figure out, but more so than any other engineers, but engineers in general will talk about compensation with their peers, and I was never really familiar with that. You know, I didn't see that certainly from on the sort of profession side, or from kind of like, you know, sales and marketing people or that kind of thing. We never really talked about what the salary is, but engineers, they would share their salaries like, you know, they whatever, go and grab the Tim Hortons coffee and talk about their what are you getting, and so that really forced me to make sure that the whole comp structure was really fair and equitable and transparent. And that's not easy to do because you have different tenures of people that you have to respect and different experience bases, and maybe there's a strategic element to one employee versus another and all that kind of thing. And how do you differentiate that, and why is Jane worth more than Joe, and so on and so forth. And so in some ways you have to have a formal structure, but as long as it's fair, and as long as you're, you know, setting your plan on some reason and is well communicated, then do it, because I guarantee you that there'll be a cross section of the organization that absolutely knows what, you know, intermediate level software engineer here is making versus this intermediate level software engineer. So that's one side of it. In terms of salary levels and hiring in the marketplace, my experience with startup companies is somewhere in and around the 75% quartile to the pay ranges. So if your data is such that the market, you know, the IBM Cognos of the world is hiring at $50,000, you have to be at least at the 75th quartile to the average pay range in there. And there's a number of, you know, surveys that you can access in terms of salary ranges and get that kind of data, or you can simply ask during the hiring process to pull some of that data out. But you don't have to be the highest paying person, because you're offering a lot of other capabilities inside a young company that the big boys just cannot match at all. So usually it's somewhere in and around the 75% range. At 50% of range, you're not going to get A-grade people. You're just not going to do it. So you do have to step up to the plate and pay to some level. And again, it's the other aspects of a startup experience that compensate for that hard dollar amount. In terms of incentive plans, what's worked for me has been a combination of both profit sharing, which is really hard in a young company stage, that, okay, we're not going to make money for 3 years. How are we going to do this? How do you do profit sharing? Why are we, you know, how am I going to get everybody, you know, going to the wall quarter on quarter for 3 years when we're not profitable? So that's a separate issue, but certainly for companies that are driving profitability, I believe in a profit sharing incentive plan, and that, you know, there's a myriad of different structures inside that. And then the classic stock option scenario is one that still has value. I mean, markets are beat up. There's no public market liquidity right now, and there's certainly no very little IPO activity going on, but it will come back. Guarantee it will come back, and there will be, you know, IPOs coming out of this, you know, out of the investment banking community in the near terms. But in the meantime, an ESOP structure is still of value. It can't be the only tool in your quiver, the only arrow in your quiver to compensate for other aspects of the overall plan, but it is useful and worthwhile. And then there's a whole group of just fun rewards and incentives that it's amazing how much a bragging right and a stupid internal trophy and award is worth it inside an overall culture and comp structure. A couple of the bigger challenges that have come across my experience base has been the private equity influence on an organization and trying to match all that you're doing inside the company with that other stakeholder being the external investor. And that external investor, to a great extent, has the very same interests that you do in building a company, in terms of want it to be successful, want to grab market share, want to get to revenue, want to be profitable, all that kind of thing. But you always have to keep in mind that there's also another objective that investor has, and that's an IRR, an internal rate of return target of X, and it's also a liquidity strategy or an exit strategy of Y. And so they have to, in the interest of their investors, for example, repatriate within a 5 or a 7-year time horizon. And so you have to keep that in mind, that holy smokes, we've had this investor supporting and encouraging us and working with us for the past 5 years. That clock is ticking. Those guys are going to be looking for an exit soon. What am I going to do? How do I keep that, that investor happy and participating in the company? So that's a tough challenge when you're also thinking selfishly about the business and trying to move the yardsticks there. And the other one is just that step grade growth of a company where you're no longer tiny. You can't make excuses. Well, we're just a startup. We don't have to have employee benefits. Well, we're just a startup. We don't really have to have all that, T's crossed and I's dotted. It does come on stream. And, a prime example of that is just a really strong HR and organizational development function inside a company. You simply can't afford it in the early days, but as soon as you can afford it, either virtually or full-time, it's really great to have on board, because employees that you're attracting when you're 5 years old or 3 years old aren't the same employees that you're attracting when you're, working out of your basement and sitting on beer cases. So the other side of it is that eventually more and more formal structures have to come on stream, which is again a bit of a hassle. But suddenly, I need an employee handbook and I need to do this and all that sort of thing. So you lose that ability to be real casual with your team and your employees at a certain stage, and that's both for your own protection, for all the legal requirements and so on and so forth, but it's just good business. And so that is a challenge, and knowing when to port over to these systems and implement them and implement procedures without slowing down the momentum and the feel of a fast and agile startup. So it really is a tough one. So to wrap up on a few of the points here, I really believe that it's that adversity quotient, that ability to be resilient to curveballs and the inevitable shit happens, that you need to really have on board inside your organization, and that trumps, the fact that you got a PhD and an MBA from Ivy School. I think the tones inside organizations just respect each other. The common sense that you learn everywhere from the playground right up through companies. So it's just open communication and fair and equitable and mutual respect-based dialogue. HR expertise. I made a mistake at a previous company where I deferred on HR until maybe it wasn't too late, but it was very, fairly late in the process. And I only realized afterwards the contribution that HR can make to an organization, that you look at it and say, well, how are they helping me get product to the market, and how are they helping me design and build product? Well, so why do I need them? And so that's very naive view on things. And so the HR can be, again, that weaving thread through an organization that helps build team and bring in all the disparate groups for unity and put in systems and all that good stuff. Don't wait till the end of each quarter to talk about the business. You can do it quickly and informally throughout, and that's a good thing. And again, tie in customers whenever, wherever, as frequently as you can. And it can be, as you know, a quick recap on these guys said that. They've got a competitive intelligence from someone today, and you feed it right back in. And it's amazing when you're small and fleet of foot, how that can influence product design and result in a better end product. And then finally, again, on structures and rewards, don't play that crazy game of the folly of rewarding for A and hoping for B. It just doesn't happen. So really try to match those incentive plans to the type of rewards you're driving for. So that's what I wanted to roll out around teams and human capital and some of the success factors that have come forward. So thank you. Yeah. So the question was, with respect to new hiring, should there be a probationary 3-month period? And I believe absolutely yes. I think it's, I think 6 months is probably pushing the envelope a little too far, but 3 months is pretty standard and pretty typical. And it gives you a chance to, on both sides, to have a honeymoon, so to speak, and you can really prove out that fit, and you can find out for sure whether someone's got what it takes or not. And one example that comes to me is I hired a very technical person out of Eastern Europe who had a wicked resume that was very accomplished on a specialized area, and thought that this is aces, like we're off. I got this problem solved. And it turned out that it was an absolute fabricated resume. And it was tough to substantiate the credentials of this individual at the time. And so reference checks and so on didn't turn this up. But afterwards, it became clearly apparent that this was somewhat falsified. And so the probation period there worked to our advantage, that we weren't under the handcuffs of notice period. You had no overhang of severance, and so you had more flexibility as an employer. But also, I think in some examples, the people themselves say, hey man, this just isn't my company. I'm not into this. And so I think 3 months is a pretty good number, and that works well. And it also helps, for example, before employee benefits trigger and the company has to lay out additional costs around that only happens after the probation.
On the partners, when you get the company started, sometimes you get partners and things go well at the beginning, but eventually there might be some differences of opinion and difficulties. Have you had an experience similar where to that, and do you have any words of advice on how to handle situations like that?
So the question was related to partnering as a young company, and I think if I play it back right, it's experience around the the challenges or differences of young partnerships and how those evolve as you engage together. So I think partnerships in general are critical to a startup success. I think trying to go alone without bridging on the supply side, bridging on the channel marketing, go-to-market side, and bridging on, say, customer even partners is essential. So, so yeah, I have some experience there, and I think it comes back again to a couple of things. One of them being absolute open, straightforward, and honest communication at all times, and so not over-promising and under-delivering. Not getting too focused on the legalese of partnership agreements in the early days. I like structures where you go out and try to, just have a cooperative win-win relationship before you see if the requirements to do a bunch of investment in formal agreements and so on is required. I think overall, when you do come into conflict, it's again getting it on the table and not having it as a thorn in your side is what solves it. But I don't know if that answers your question to a great extent, but lots of examples there. Please. So the question was, at what size does an organization require dedicated HR? The beautiful thing these days is there's a number of these virtual HR services or people in the marketplace that certainly Mars has referrals that can be made that allow a really young company, even a company of 3 or 5 employees, to get the services of a well-experienced HR person right out of the starting blocks. And so I would recommend that model almost at the get-go. But I think in terms of dedicated HR, it's probably somewhere around, I don't know, 50 or 60 employees, or maybe 40. It's not 10 or 15. And so it's somewhere in there, but you can absolutely leverage these virtual HR professionals that are, have put a shingle on their wall as their own gig, and they were previously the, HR director at Bell Canada or something, and they have good experience. So, yes. Yeah. The question was, how do you attract sales and marketing people at very early stage into a company, even pre-funding? And that's a tough one because back to my comment about salespeople being coin-operated, salespeople are coin-operated. So the real good salespeople always want to make money. And so you've got to, how do I work it so that these people are going to make money, but I can't pay them right now? So some of them will gravitate towards a piece of the action, so a stock option type scenario, and the really high performance people probably want a bigger piece of the company. And so, the classic stories of the salespeople are the highest paid guys in the organization. If you can't pay them in hard currency, then you're granting a fairly attractive stock option to them. That sometimes works. But the other one is to pay them a very, very lucrative commission plan, much more lucrative than you'd pay once the organization scales to a certain amount. And that sometimes works. And in the absence of those two, I think the key is to try and attract a channel partner. And the channel partners can, as long as you can get your share of attention from that channel partner and they think about your product and actually work to market and sell it, they can sometimes be a low-cost virtual sales force. So those are three of the elements, but it's tough to hire a direct salesperson into an organization young who is very accomplished and has the relationships and is used to, having, a $3 million quota that they make, $200,000 or $300,000 out of. I guess the final strategy that sometimes works is you hire a real junior person, but that's a risky strategy though, because you just don't have time to train a salesperson, and they don't have those relationships. But all right, well, thanks again, everyone, and pleasure to be